Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm here to take a look at the Hasbro Plasma Series Ghostbuster figures and mainly just compare them with the Mattel ones from about 10 years ago to try and let you know which ones I think are the best out of the two sets. Now first, for a general comparison of the body types of the two lines, because for the most part each figure has the same body with the same articulation, the same size and everything, but Hasbro wins hands down when you come to articulation. The Hasbro figures have double joints at the knees, double joints at the elbows, more of a swivel at the ankles. They've got an ab crunch as well, so you can get far more poses and much more playability out of the Hasbro series than the Mattel series. It only has single joints at the elbows and the knees. And also the pads, I find, on the Mattel one mean that the arms don't really go out straight. That kind of limits the articulation there even more than just having one joint. So for articulation alone, Hasbro is definitely superior. As you can see, there's no swivel at the top of the arm there above the bicep and tricep, the way there is on the new figures as well. So, you know, that one will swivel out to the side, double jointed. They're really stiff joints on the Hasbro one, whereas the arm on the Mattel one won't swivel to the side, and it only goes so far. I mean, it does still bend up quite a ways there, but not as much as a double jointed, and it just won't go down as straight looking either. There isn't even an ab crunch on the Mattel ones either. They just kind of swivel to the side there, whereas Peter here, you know, you can have them bending forward and backwards a bit. Not that I massively need an ab crunch on my Ghostbusters, but it does help a bit for posability and playability. The thigh swivel is a bit higher on the Mattel figures as well, which I always think looks better, because I'm not a massive fan of thigh swivels anyway. It's just a really unnatural articulation point. No one's legs swivel that way, and often it breaks up the sculpt as well. If you try and use that articulation, I mean, look at it, it just looks terrible because the sculpt's completely broken up. Looks awful. Whereas on the Hasbro figure, at least, it's a little bit higher up, which I don't think looks quite as bad, but it still, you know, it noticeably breaks the sculpt up, not as much as the Mattel version, but it's really an articulation point that I could do without. And I don't know, does anyone use thigh swivels? Let me know if you find them handy. I just think they look ugly. It's a really ugly and unnatural point of articulation, but it's at least positioned a bit better on the Hasbro version, so it doesn't look quite as obtrusive. As for the sculpting, they're both pretty good sculpt-wise. I'm not entirely sure which one's actually more accurate to the movies, but they both have a lot of detail. I don't necessarily think one is any better than the other with the detailing. One thing I'll say about the Mattel ones is that they would throw a bit of variety in. Like Egon here, who would have the gloves sculpted onto the belt rather than them all wearing the gloves. And then you'd get some figures that did have the gloves, like Ray there, and some figures that don't. Whereas with the Hasbro line, they all have the gloves on. None of them have any slight variations to differentiate them and make them look a little bit less like they've all got the same body type. So I do like that with the Mattel figures. I do like that on the Hasbro figures you can attach the accessories to the belt. You can attach the PKE meter there to Egon, Peter and Winston's belts, and you can attach the ecto goggles and the ghost trap to Ray's belt. So that's a pretty nice feature, I think, that the Mattel one didn't have. It's nice that they can actually carry all their accessories, or at least most of them, rather than just having to put them to the side. Also, you see here on the Mattel one, that yellow pipe is sculpted in kind of a clear plastic, whereas on the Hasbro one, it's painted on. And I think the clear plastic looks better than painted on. It also seems to be in a different position on the Hasbro one. I don't know which one is the more accurate. With the Mattel one, you can see it's kind of in the middle there, going down, whereas it's more to the side of the back on the Hasbro version, but I do like how the clear one looks, even if it's not in an accurate position. As I say, I don't actually know which one is the more accurate. Maybe if it's just attached to the belt, it can move around in real life. I don't really understand that pipe or what it's for, but I just prefer it looking clear, like on the Mattel version. The Mattel figures' suits are also a little bit darker. Now, it really depends on the scene and the lighting in the movie on whether they look darker like the Mattel one or lighter like the Hasbro one. So it's not a huge deal, but I think I probably do prefer the colouring of the Mattel figure. If we look at the Proton packs, the Hasbro one is a lot bigger, which is more accurate. The Mattel Proton packs all look a bit too small. Also, an annoying thing with the Mattel ones is that the first wave of figures didn't have removable Proton packs, which just seems like a really odd choice that you wouldn't do that. So that alone was annoying, that you then had to rebuy all the same characters again if you wanted them just to have removable Proton packs a few waves later in the Mattel version. The wire on the Hasbro pack is a lot more flexible. The wire on the Mattel ones was really quite stiff and quite brittle and would easily snap, as it did with my Winston Zeddemore. As you can see there, it snapped off the bottom there, and also on one of my Plasma Blaster Ray Stantz figures it snapped as well, whereas I don't feel like that's a concern with the Hasbro figures because it's a lot more flexible and rubbery, so I really don't think that would snap at all. But with these ones on the Mattel figure, I always felt like I had to be a bit delicate with them. On the Mattel figure, the Proton wand kind of attaches on at a bit of an angle, as you can see there, whereas with all the Hasbro ones it attaches facing straight down. Now in the movie you see it both ways. In some scenes the Proton wand is on at an angle, in some ways it's on facing straight down, so I don't think either way is particularly more accurate than the other. It really depends on your own personal preference. I do kind of like how it looks being on at an angle like the Mattel one, but it's not a deal breaker for me by any stretch that it's straight down like that on the Hasbro versions. One thing that bothers me about the Hasbro Proton packs is that the wire coming out of the top of the handle of the Proton one sticks up too much. You can see on the Mattel one where straight as it comes out of the end of the handle it then kind of bends down, whereas on the Hasbro one it sticks up a lot, because it should kind of hang down like that, if you get what I mean there, but because it's so rigid, even though it's a pliable plastic, it's sculpted in a way that it's rigid at that part, so you end up with a cable sticking out of the top of the Proton wand's handle that kind of sticks up in the air more than it should do, rather than hanging down naturally. The one thing though that I do think is vastly superior on the Mattel versions is the hand sculpts. For some bizarre reason on the Hasbro ones the hands have trigger fingers moulded in. Now why does a Ghostbuster need a trigger finger? They're not using machine guns. If they had hands that were moulded like the Mattel ones, that were just moulded to wrap around the Proton wand like that, they would be able to hold it so much easier, but it's actually really difficult to get the wand into the figure's hands on these Hasbro ones, mainly because of the trigger finger, especially on the left hand. On the right hand it's not so bad, but on the left hand it's really hard to wrap it around the part where the finger grip is on the Proton wand. Now that's something that the Mattel one didn't have. It didn't have the kind of grip moulded onto the Proton wand's barrel there. It's just kind of round, whereas on here you've got the grip moulded in, if you can see that there, which isn't on the Mattel one, so that does give the Mattel one a bit of an advantage on being able to hold it a bit easier, I suppose. But if the Hasbro figures just had regular round shaped hand grips, they would be able to hold on to that easily. Having the trigger finger moulded in, which is utterly pointless anyway, makes it really difficult to get the hand to properly wrap around that grip and hold the Proton wand in a way that looks good without bending the barrel. Also, the articulation on the wrists for the Hasbro ones go up and down, which is good on the right hand, which is holding the end of the proton wand. That makes sense. But on the left hand, you really want the articulation to go sort of in and out rather than up and down. Now what I mean by that is, if I show you here, his hand, the articulation goes sort of up like that and down. Whereas to hold the proton wand and get a decent pose out of him, you'd really want the articulation to be like the Mattel one, where it's going sort of in and out at the wrist, like that. So if only I could swap out all of the left hands from the Mattel figures and put on the Ghostbusters left hands, that would make them perfect, because that really is the major flaw of the Hasbro figures, is that I know I keep saying it, but I just don't understand why they gave them trigger fingers. Were they hands they had left over from the G.I. Joe line and they just reused those to save money or something? Because I don't understand why you would sculpt trigger fingers into the Ghostbusters hands. They don't use traditional guns like that. They needed just round sculpted hands like the Mattel ones there to hold the barrel better. And I mean, having a Ghostbuster that can hold the proton wand properly and get a decent pose out of them, you think that would be one of the main things that they would think about whilst designing these figures. It really frustrates me to no end that that hand is just so awkward to get the proton wand in and to hold it properly without bending the barrel of the proton wand. Now to compare the figures on an individual basis in terms of the face sculpts. Now I'm going to start with Peter Venkman here, and the Hasbro one is definitely a vast improvement. It definitely looks a lot more like Bill Murray. The Mattel one always kind of reminded me of the animated version. If you've ever seen the original promo for the real Ghostbusters cartoon, Peter Venkman initially had a far more Bill Murray-esque design to him, which was then changed for the final cartoon. But in that promo, when you get a kind of cartoon version of of Bill Murray, I think this kind of looks like it a bit. He's got a bit of a softer, more cartoony design to him, whereas this one definitely looks more like the real Bill Murray. Got a bit of a smirk on his face that I like. It's not perfect. I feel like the Marvel Legends figures have a lot more accurate face sculpts than these Ghostbusters, but that may well be because they're not able to scan the actors' faces in now because they've all aged by 30, 35 years, whereas with the Marvel Legends figures they can scan the actors' faces in as they look in the movies in the present day, to get the sculpting work to look more accurate. I don't think it's a perfect Peter, but I think it's the best we've had out of Diamond Select and Mattel and Hasbro. I think this is definitely the best looking, most accurate looking. And now for Ray Stantz, and this one, I mean, there's no competition. The Mattel one just looked hideous. That always looked bad, and I think everyone thought so. It doesn't look anything like Dan Aykroyd. I don't know what was going on with this head sculpt. It just looks terrible. So yeah, no competition here. I think you can blatantly see which one is the more accurate to Dan Aykroyd. And once again, I think this is the best Dan Aykroyd head sculpt we've had in any Ghostbusters figure line. I just don't know what Mattel was thinking. That was the worst of the Mattel figures. It just did not look anything like Dan Aykroyd. Just awful. Also, I like that Ray has been given a different body type to the other three Ghostbusters. Peter, Winston and Egon all have exactly the same body, whereas Ray, they've actually given him a bit of a belly. And even though I didn't think Dan Aykroyd was noticeably fatter than the others in the movie, because my first exposure to Ghostbusters was the real Ghostbusters cartoon, and I have a lot of affection for that, I do always think of Ray as the fat one. So I'm glad that the figure has been given a little bit of a belly, just as kind of a nod to that. And I don't think it was supposed to be a nod to the cartoon. I think it was just that maybe Dan did have a little bit more of a belly in the movie. But like I say, I never found that noticeable. But because of my love for real Ghostbusters, I do like that the figure of Ray has been made the fat one.
I'm definitely the fat one, and I know that.
Now for Egon Spengler. And I always used to think that the Mattel one was really accurate, but now that I've got the Hasbro one, I actually see that the Mattel one isn't that accurate. The Mattel one is almost more like you would picture Egon in your mind's eye and had to sculpt him, rather than if you actually had a photograph of Harold Ramis and sculpted him. This is like, to look at first glance, you think, yeah, that is completely Egon, that is completely Harold Ramis, but no, actually, you can really see the differences. Now I've got a sculpt that is more accurate to the actor. Now with the Mattel one, I do kind of like that he has actual glasses that are separate to his face. Now, quite often when action figures have glasses that are a separate piece, they end up looking like jam jars. The clear part is far too thick and they just look terrible. But these are pretty nice glasses that he's got on there. Whereas on the Hasbro one, they're just sculpted in, which looks good from the front. But if you get a side view, you then see that the glasses are just kind of merging into his flesh. So part of me wishes that he had the glasses as a separate piece. But I suppose for the most part, we're going to be looking at the figures from a front view, and it certainly doesn't look terrible. I mean, look, you can get quite a few angles where it doesn't show the flesh melding into the glasses. It's only if you're looking at it right from the side there that you notice it, whereas on the Mattel one, obviously you don't. But it's still, the glasses on the Mattel one are a little bit thick. The rims are a bit thick because I guess you just wouldn't be able to make them thin enough to look like they do on the Hasbro one, but still be a separate piece. And as I said earlier, I do like that Egon here has the gloves in his belt, just to make him stand out a bit from the other Ghostbusters. And like I say, I do wish that the Hasbro ones had a bit more variety with the belt, just tiny little details that make them look a bit more unique from each other, rather than it being too obvious that they all share the same body sculpt. And finally now, Winston Zeddemore. Now I don't have the Mattel Winston Zeddemore figure based on the first movie. This is him in his Ghostbusters 2 uniform, but it is exactly the same figure, just in a different colour and with the moustache not painted. It's exactly the same sculpt, except for on the belt he's got a yellow walkie-talkie. But this is, I think, the best Mattel sculpt. There's something about that head sculpt that does really look like Ernie Hudson to me. The Hasbro one, sorry, there's just something slightly off about it, and I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's the teeth, he's a bit toothy, but it just doesn't quite make me think Ernie Hudson as much as the Mattel one does. So I'm tempted to say that this is the one figure where the Mattel figure's face sculpt is actually maybe a little bit better. The sculpting seems a bit softer on the Hasbro one. The detailing seems a bit finer on the face and the head of the Mattel version. So it's a bit of a toss-up for me, this one. But of course, no one's going to get the Mattel Winston and mix him with the Hasbro rest of the team, because it just wouldn't really look right. So there's only one that looks possibly better in the Mattel line, and it is possibly. I'm still torn on which one I like the most, which one I think is more accurate. So in general, yeah, the Hasbro ones definitely have the better face sculpts. This is the only one where you can kind of think, I'm not sure. Another thing I didn't mention about the Proton ones is that you can see on the Mattel one, they have that little red wire on the end, which the Hasbro ones don't. Because for the most part, the Hasbro Proton packs and ones do have a little bit more detail, are a little bit more accurate. It's just that red wire not being there is the only thing, really. And I don't know if it's because it would have gotten in the way of the Proton stream that you can attach to the end of the wands in the Hasbro line that came with Winston, that they didn't put that on there. But it's not a major issue. It's only one small detail. And to be honest, I can't say I ever really noticed that red wire in the movies. It's only because the Mattel figures had it there that I even really know it exists. Now, quite a few people have complained about the size of the Hasbro figures, that they're shorter than Marvel Legends and the new G.I. Joe line and Star Wars Black, which is true, but I'm actually glad that they've made the new figures to scale with the Mattel figures, because you can use accessories from the Mattel figures now. As you can see, I've got Peter with the Ghostbusters 2 mug. and like the Geiger meter and some other little gizmos that came with the Mattel figures will fit in the Hasbro figures' hands. And also there may be some characters, at least for the time being, that the Mattel line made figures of that the Hasbro line hasn't yet and may not, like the Sculpt brothers. So I like that there's some compatibility there that you can mix and match if you want to. Though hopefully this video has helped anyone who already owns the Mattel figures and were kind of on the fence about the Hasbro line. Do I really need them? Is there really any point replacing the figures I've already got? Hopefully this comparison has helped you to make your mind up. And even if you don't need your mind made up for you, hopefully you've at least found it interesting to see a comparison between the two. One last thing I wanted to mention before I go is if you're looking for a Slimer that's perfectly to scale with the Hasbro line, this Slimer that comes with the slime tubs is perfect in my opinion. It's a pretty good sculpt. You have to keep an eye out on the paint jobs when you buy these to try and find the best one. Some of the paint jobs can be a bit sloppy on the face, but otherwise it's a really nice sculpt and it's perfectly to scale. I think more than any other Slimer figure that I've seen is perfectly to scale with this size of action figure. Now, I don't know if these were ever even released in America, but in the UK they were everywhere back in 2016, and you can still find them in Smith's toy shops, I've noticed. I haven't seen them anywhere else for a while. But basically you get the little figure and it comes with a little barrel of slime. And the barrel of slime itself is pretty good. It's kind of sculpted to look like an oil barrel with Ghostbuster logo on it and kind of, you know, warning signs and things. And the actual slime itself is really good. It's like a really good texture. I've already done a video reviewing those, so I won't go on about them too much, but there were 3 different ones. You could get one with the Ghostbusters logo, one with the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, and one with Slimer here. All the figures were that size, so the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man is obviously ridiculously small. But yeah, for a Slimer that's going to fit in with these figures, if you want one as a stand-in at least before Hasbro give us a Slimer, I think this is the one. Because quite often when we get Slimer figures that are trying to be to scale with kind of 6 inch figures, because they put articulation in the shoulders and elbows, he ends up with arms that are just way too long and it looks a bit gangly to me. Of course this one doesn't have any articulation in the arms, but I think it still looks better, and I don't know if I really need Slimer to have articulation. Maybe just a swivel at the shoulders would be good, so the arms would go up and down, but I really don't need elbow articulation for him if it's going to mean that he's got overly long Mr. Tickle arms. I just want a Slimer that looks good. He's not a character that I think many people are going to really desperately need articulation for. So there you have it, a comparison between the Hasbro and the Mattel Ghostbuster toy lines. I'm really hoping that for Wave 2 they make the real Ghostbuster character designs in the 5 inch, 6 inch scale, and then maybe for Wave 3 make the Extreme Ghostbusters characters, but we'll see. I suspect they'll probably try and stick to the movie for a while at least and give us the characters in their Ghostbusters 3 uniforms like Winston there, you know, with this sort of darker uniform, and then maybe give us some of the other characters like Vigo and Janosch. I would like to get Lewis in his Ghostbusters uniform. It'd be nice to get Janine as well with the red hair, but eventually, if they want this line to continue, you are quite limited with what characters there are in the movie that you can make figures of, so hopefully they will at some point move this line onto the real Ghostbusters and Extreme Ghostbusters. And I think if they are going to do that, they'd be better off kind of switching it around. Don't just stick to the movie for a couple of years and then do real Ghostbusters. You know, throw real Ghostbusters in Wave 2, then go back to the movie for Wave 3, then go to Extreme for Wave 4. So you're mixing it up a bit. Otherwise people might just get, you know, they're only interested in the movie figures and then they give up on the line after that or something. So mix it up a bit like that, Hasbro. I think it'd be pretty cool to get some decent real Ghostbusters figures in this kind of scale. Because they're doing movie figures in the real Ghostbusters toy line scale, in that old Kenner scale from the 80s. So I don't know why they can't do real Ghostbusters figures in the movie scale, like these figures, hopefully. Anyway, thanks for watching everybody, and I'll see you again soon.